You don't remember me, do you? He stood there in my daughter's living room, that familiar smile cutting through me like a blade. 5 years had passed, and here he was. The man who once promised me forever, now holding my daughter's hand. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, where the walls are thin enough to hear my neighbor's television through the night and the radiator clanks like an old ghost. The linoleum in my kitchen has worn spots where I've stood washing dishes for decades, and the window above my sink looks out onto a narrow courtyard where pigeons gather on fire escapes. Every morning, I wake at 5:30 to the distant rumble of the N train beneath Roosevelt Avenue. The sound used to comfort me. It meant the world was moving, that life was happening. Now it just reminds me how alone I am in this city of millions. I make my coffee in the same chipped blue mug I've used for 20 years. Sarah gave it to me when she was 12, painted with shaky letters that read, "World's Best Mom." The paint has faded now, but I still trace those letters with my finger while I wait for the coffee to brew. Sarah is my youngest, my only daughter. She's 32 now, with her father's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. For the past 5 years since she moved to Manhattan for her marketing job, our relationship has felt like walking on ice that's too thin to hold my weight. She calls me every Thursday evening, or she used to. The calls have become shorter, more distant. Last Thursday, my phone sat silent on the kitchen table while I waited, watching the clock tick past 8, then 9, then 10. No call, no text, nothing. I told myself she was busy. Sarah's always been busy. Even as a child, she moved through life like she was late for something important. But the silence felt different this time, heavier, like a door closing somewhere I couldn't see. The next morning, I dialed her number. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, bright and professional. "Hi, you've reached Sarah Collins. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The beep felt like a small death. "Sarah, honey, it's Mom. Just checking in. I missed talking to you yesterday. Call me when you can." She didn't call back that day. Or the next. I've spent 32 years learning every note in my daughter's voice. Every pause that means she's thinking, every laugh that means she's truly happy versus the one she uses when she's just being polite. I know when she's tired, when she's stressed, when she's falling in love. At least I thought I did. But lately, Sarah has become a stranger to me. Our conversations feel scripted, like she's reading from notes she prepared in advance. "How's work, Mom? Are you eating enough?" The weather's been crazy, hasn't it? Safe topics that keep us at arm's length. I want to ask her real questions. Are you happy? Do you miss me? When did you stop needing your mother? But these questions feel too dangerous, like they might shatter whatever fragile connection we still have. Instead, I talk about the weather and my book club and Mrs. Chen from 4B, who's been having trouble with her hip. I tell her about the new bodega owner who always asks about her, and how the corner where she used to catch the school bus now has a trendy coffee shop that charges $5 for what used to cost 50 cents. Sarah listens politely and makes appropriate sounds. "Mm-hmm. That's nice, Mom." "Oh, really?" But I can hear her attention wandering. I can picture her scrolling through her phone or checking emails while I ramble about my small, shrinking world. I raised Sarah alone after her father left when she was 15. Marcus walked out on a Tuesday in October, leaving nothing but a note on the kitchen counter and a closet full of empty hangers. The note said he needed to find himself, as if he'd misplaced himself somewhere between our mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences. Sarah blamed me, of course. 15-year-old girls need someone to blame, and I was the one still there. She screamed at me that night, her face red with rage and tears. "Why did you make him leave? Why couldn't you just be what he wanted?" I didn't tell her about the other woman. I didn't tell her about the credit cards he'd maxed out or the lies he'd told about working late. I let her blame me because I thought it would be easier for her to hate me than to lose faith in love entirely. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told her the truth from the beginning. Maybe then she would understand why I work so hard to protect her, why I worry when she doesn't call, why I can't bear the thought of watching her make the same mistakes I did. After Marcus left, I worked 3 jobs to keep us in our apartment in Jackson Heights. I cleaned offices early in the morning before Sarah woke up, worked at a diner during lunch hours, and stocked shelves at a grocery store until midnight. My hands were always cracked and raw, my feet always aching, but Sarah never went without. I saved every penny I could for her college fund. I wore the same winter coat for 8 years, patched and repatched until it was more stitches than original fabric. I cut my own hair and bought groceries from the discount bins, and never, ever bought anything for myself that wasn't absolutely necessary. When Sarah graduated high school, she had enough saved for 4 years at SUNY Purchase. She studied communications and marketing, made the dean's list every semester, and landed her dream job in Manhattan before she even graduated. I was so proud I cried in the parking lot after her graduation ceremony. But success changed her. Or maybe it just revealed parts of her that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. She moved to a studio apartment on the Lower East Side that cost more per month than I spent on groceries in 6 months. She bought expensive clothes and went to trendy restaurants and posted pictures of her glamorous life on Instagram. I followed her on social media like a detective, studying every photo for clues about her happiness. Sarah laughing with coworkers at a holiday party. Sarah at a rooftop bar with friends I'd never met. Sarah in a new dress, a new haircut, a new life that had no room for her mother from Queens. She invited me to visit her apartment exactly once, 3 years ago. I took the subway into Manhattan, clutching a bag of homemade cookies and wearing my best dress, the navy blue one I bought for her college graduation. Her building had a doorman who looked me up and down like I was selling something. Sarah's apartment was beautiful but cold. White walls, expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable, art I didn't understand. She gave me a quick tour, pointing out her walk-in closet and the view of the city from her window. I sat on her pristine white couch, afraid to touch anything, while she made coffee in a machine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We spent 2 hours together that day. 2 hours out of 3 years. She kept checking her phone, apologizing for important work messages that couldn't wait. When I got up to leave, she hugged me briefly and promised to visit soon. That was the last time I saw her apartment. She never did visit. When I ask about coming to Queens, she always has excuses. Work is crazy right now, Mom. I'm traveling so much for my job. My schedule is just insane. Always something more important than spending time with the woman who raised her. I understand that she's busy. I understand that she's building her career, that she's young and ambitious and has places to go. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less when she cancels our Thursday phone calls without explanation. It doesn't make the silence easier to bear. Last month was my 67th birthday. I woke up that morning with a flutter of hope in my chest, thinking maybe Sarah would surprise me. Maybe she'd show up at my door with flowers or call early to sing happy birthday like she used to when she was little. I waited all day. I baked myself a small chocolate cake, Sarah's favorite flavor, and sat at my kitchen table with 2 plates, just in case. I kept my phone next to the cake, checking it every few minutes to make sure it was working, that I hadn't somehow missed her call. At 8 o'clock that evening, my phone finally buzzed. A text message from Sarah. Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I'm swamped at work today. Hope you're having a good day. Love you. 18 words. 18 words to acknowledge the day I entered this world, the day that made me her mother. I sat there staring at that message, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not break, that would have been cleaner. Just crack, like ice on a pond that looks solid but isn't safe to stand on. I typed back, "Thank you, sweetheart. Love you too." Then I turned off my phone and ate birthday cake alone in my kitchen while sirens wailed outside my window and the upstairs neighbors fought about money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when I became so easy to forget. When did I become the kind of person whose birthday merits a text message between meetings? When did I become an obligation instead of a joy? The worst part is that I know she loves me. Sarah isn't cruel or uncaring. She's just busy, distracted, focused on her own life. In her mind, a quick text shows thoughtfulness. She probably told herself she was being a good daughter by remembering at all. But I needed more that day. I needed to hear her voice, to have her ask how I was spending my birthday, to know that I mattered enough for 10 minutes of genuine attention. Instead, I got efficiency. Love reduced to its most basic components, delivered in a format that required the least possible effort. I started seeing Dr. Rodriguez, a therapist who works with seniors, about 6 months ago. She has a small office above a bakery in Elmhurst, and the smell of fresh bread drifts up through the floorboards during our sessions. She's younger than Sarah, with kind eyes and patient hands that never rush me when I struggle to find the right words. "Margaret," she said during one of our early sessions, "what do you need from Sarah that she's not giving you?" The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time thinking about what Sarah needed from me, financial help, emotional support, unconditional love, that I'd never considered what I needed in return. "Connection," I said finally. "I need to feel like I matter to her, like she sees me as more than just Mom, the obligation." Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "And have you told Sarah this?" I shook my head. How could I? How do you tell your successful, independent daughter that her nearly 70-year-old mother is lonely? How do you explain that you lie awake at night wondering if she'd notice if you disappeared? "Maybe," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "It's time to start asking for what you need instead of just giving what you think she wants." But asking feels dangerous. What if Sarah says no? What if she finally tells me that I'm too much, too needy, too old to be relevant to her new life? At least now I have hope, however thin. If I ask for more and she rejects me, I'll have nothing left. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I was scrolling through Instagram, looking at Sarah's latest posts, when I saw something that made my heart stop. A photo of Sarah at a restaurant smiling brightly, her arm around a man I recognized immediately. David Martinez. The love of my life from 5 years ago. David and I met at a grief support group in Corona. We were both learning to live with loss. His wife had died of cancer. My husband had left me for another woman. We were both broken in different ways, but somehow our broken pieces fit together. For 8 months, David was my world. He was retired from the post office, lived in a neat house in Flushing, and had a laugh that made me feel young again. He brought me flowers every Friday, not expensive arrangements from a florist, but simple bouquets from the corner market that he picked out with care. We took long walks through Flushing Meadows Park, holding hands like teenagers. He cooked for me, real Puerto Rican food that made my kitchen smell like heaven. We watched old movies on his couch, his arm around my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I fell in love with him slowly, then all at once. I fell in love with the way he listened to my stories about Sarah, with how he never tried to fix my problems but just held space for my pain. I fell in love with his gentle hands and his morning routine and the way he sang off-key in the shower. I thought he loved me too. We talked about the future, carefully, tentatively, but with real hope. Maybe we could travel together. Maybe he could move into my apartment, or I could move into his house. Maybe I didn't have to spend my golden years alone. Then one day, he was gone. No phone call, no explanation, no goodbye. His number went straight to voicemail. His house was empty, a for sale sign planted in the yard like a grave marker. The grief support group leader said he'd moved to be closer to family. I spent weeks crying, then months trying to understand. Had I misread everything? Had I been foolish to think a man like David could love a woman like me? I replayed every conversation, analyzed every gesture, but I couldn't find the moment when I'd lost him. Now, 3 years later, here he was in my daughter's Instagram photo. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. The caption read, "Perfect dinner with my perfect guy. Can't wait for you all to meet him." My hands shook as I scrolled through more pictures. David at a Broadway show with Sarah. David in Central Park with Sarah. David and Sarah at what looked like a work party, her hand resting possessively on his arm. How was this possible? How could the universe be so cruel as to give my daughter the man I'd lost? How could David be dating someone young enough to be his daughter, my daughter, after he'd vanished from my life without explanation? I called Sarah immediately, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. Hey, Mom, what's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I saw your Instagram post. The man you're dating, what's his name? A pause. David. Why? David Martinez? Another pause, longer this time. Yeah, Mom, is everything okay? You sound weird. I closed my eyes, trying to find words that made sense. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I used to date David. We were together for almost a year, about 5 years ago. Silence on the other end of the line. Complete suffocating silence. Finally, Sarah laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. That's impossible, Mom. David's never mentioned you. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? David Martinez, retired postal worker, lives in... Well, he used to live in Flushing? Mom. Sarah's voice was sharp now, impatient. I think you're confused. David's a retired teacher, and he's lived in Manhattan his whole life. Maybe you knew someone with the same name, but I knew it was him. I'd studied that face in 100 stolen moments, memorized the way he smiled, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. There was no mistake. Sarah, I'm not confused. I know it's him. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Mom. You're obviously mixing him up with someone else. Look, I really have to go. David's taking me to dinner tonight. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. How could Sarah not believe me? How could David pretend he'd never known me? I spent the next 3 days replaying that conversation, trying to understand. Maybe David had lied to me about where he lived, about his job. Maybe he'd been living a double life even then. Or maybe, and this thought made me sick, maybe I was so forgettable that he genuinely didn't remember our relationship. On Thursday, I called Sarah for our usual weekly conversation. This time she answered immediately. Mom, before you say anything, I need to apologize about the other day. I was stressed about work, and I shouldn't have been short with you. Her voice was warm, contrite. For a moment, I let myself hope that she'd thought about what I said, that she was ready to have a real conversation. It's okay, sweetheart. But about David... Mom. The warmth disappeared instantly. I looked into it, okay? I asked David, and he's never lived in Flushing. He's never been to a grief support group. I think you're remembering someone else. Sarah, I'm not... And honestly, Mom, it's kind of weird that you're so fixated on this. David and I are happy. We're talking about getting engaged. I thought you'd be excited for me. Engaged. The word hit me like a physical blow. My daughter was planning to marry the man who'd broken my heart, who'd disappeared from my life like I'd never existed. Sarah, please just listen to me. I have pictures of David and me together. I don't want to see them, Mom. Whatever you think you remember, it doesn't matter now. David's with me. We're building a life together, and I need you to respect that. But sweetheart, don't you think it's strange? What I think is strange is that my 67-year-old mother is jealous of my relationship. It's not healthy, Mom. Maybe you should talk to someone. The accusation stung worse than anything she'd said before. Jealous. She thought I was jealous of her youth, her happiness, her ability to capture a man's attention. She couldn't see that this was about truth, about the impossibility of coincidence, about the need to understand how David could act like I'd never existed. I'm not jealous, Sarah. I'm concerned. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? From finding love? From making the same mistake I made? The words came out harsher than I intended. Sarah went quiet, and I could hear her breathing change. What's that supposed to mean? She asked finally. I wanted to tell her everything then, about how David had made me feel beautiful and wanted and alive, then disappeared without explanation. About how I'd spent 3 years wondering what I'd done wrong, what fatal flaw had driven him away. About how seeing him with her felt like watching my past and future collide in the most painful way possible. But I could hear the defensiveness in her voice, the wall she'd already built around this relationship. Anything I said would be filtered through that wall, twisted into evidence of my jealousy or confusion or pathetic need for attention. Nothing, I said quietly. I just want you to be careful. I'm 32 years old, Mom. I think I can take care of myself. After she hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of our shared history. Photo albums full of Sarah's childhood, from her first steps to her college graduation. Birthday cards she'd made me in elementary school, covered in glitter and crooked hearts. A Mother's Day gift from when she was 16. A coffee mug that said "Best Mom Ever" in cheerful red letters. Looking at these artifacts of our relationship, I tried to understand when everything had changed. When had I become someone whose concerns were dismissed, whose memories were questioned, whose love was seen as possessive rather than protective? I picked up a photo from Sarah's high school graduation. We're standing together in front of the auditorium, my arm around her shoulders, both of us glowing with pride and possibility. Sarah looks so young in the picture, so open and trusting. I look hopeful, like I believed the future would be kind to both of us. That woman in the photo couldn't have imagined this moment, sitting alone in her apartment, doubted by her own daughter, watching the man she once loved build a life with the person she loved most. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to think rationally. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I was confused. Maybe David Martinez was a common name, and I was seeing connections that didn't exist. Maybe 3 years of anger and hurt had twisted my memories into something unrecognizable. But then I remembered the way David laughed when he was genuinely delighted. A full-body laugh that started in his chest and bubbled up through his throat. I remembered the scar on his left hand from a childhood accident, shaped like a crescent moon. I remembered how he liked his coffee. Black, no sugar, and how he hummed boleros while he cooked. These weren't generic memories that could apply to any David Martinez. These were specific, intimate details that belonged to the man who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my deepest fears about growing old alone. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called in sick to my part-time job at the library and took the subway to Manhattan. I knew where Sarah worked, a marketing firm in Midtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see David for myself, to confirm what I already knew in my bones. Maybe if Sarah saw us together, she'd understand that I wasn't confused or jealous or delusional. Maybe she'd realize that her mother deserved more respect than casual dismissal. I waited across the street from Sarah's building for 3 hours, feeling ridiculous and desperate and more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Office workers streamed in and out of the building, all of them young and purposeful and utterly indifferent to the old woman haunting their sidewalk. At 1 o'clock, I finally saw them. Sarah emerged first, laughing at something on her phone, her hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. Behind her, holding the door, was David. My David. Older, yes, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But unmistakably the man who'd brought me flowers every Friday, who'd held me while I cried about Sarah's distance, who'd made me believe that love was possible at any age. They walked toward me without seeing me, Sarah's hand tucked into the crook of David's arm. They looked comfortable together, natural, like a couple who'd been together for years rather than months. They looked happy. I stepped into their path, my heart hammering against my ribs. David. He looked up, and for just a moment, one split second, I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by polite confusion. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Sarah was staring at me with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "You know exactly who I am," I said to David, ignoring Sarah's question. "We spent 8 months together. You cooked me dinner. You told me about your wife, about how lonely you were after she died. You said you loved me." David looked genuinely puzzled. "Ma'am, I think you have me confused with someone else. I've never been married." Never been married. But he'd told me about Maria, his wife of 30 years, who'd fought cancer with grace and courage until the very end. He'd shown me pictures of their wedding day, their anniversary celebrations, their quiet life together before illness stole their future. "That's not true," I whispered. "You told me about Maria. You still wear your wedding ring on a chain around your neck." For just a moment, David's hand moved toward his chest, then stopped. Sarah was looking between us with growing alarm. "Mom, Please stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself. The words stung because they were true. I was a crazy old woman making a scene on a Manhattan sidewalk, clinging to memories of a relationship that apparently meant so little to David that he could pretend it never happened. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, backing away from them. "I must be mistaken." I turned and walked away before either of them could respond, my cheeks burning with shame and my heart breaking all over again. Behind me, I could hear Sarah apologizing to David, explaining that her mother had been under stress lately, that she was getting older and sometimes confused facts. I rode the subway back to Queens in a haze of humiliation and grief. How could I have been so wrong about everything? How could I have misread a relationship so completely? Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality, mixing up names and faces and constructing elaborate fantasies to fill the empty spaces in my life. But that evening, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the box where I kept mementos from my relationship with David, ticket stubs from movies we'd seen together, a pressed flower from Central Park, where we'd had our first picnic, a handwritten note he'd left on my kitchen counter one morning. "Gone to get bagels. Back soon. Love, D." These weren't fantasies. They were proof that David Martinez had existed in my life, had claimed to love me, had shared my bed and my dreams and my loneliness. Whatever game he was playing now, whatever lies he was telling Sarah, our relationship had been real. I called Dr. Rodriguez and made an emergency appointment. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind, that my memories were valid, that 67 years of living hadn't made me so desperate for connection that I'd invented an entire relationship. "Margaret," Dr. Rodriguez said gently when I finished telling her about the confrontation, "what do you think is really happening here?" "I think David is lying to Sarah about his past. I think he's pretending he never knew me because he's ashamed of our relationship. Maybe he thinks I'm too old, too beneath him for his new life with my successful daughter." Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "That's possible. But I want you to consider another possibility. What if David genuinely doesn't want to complicate his relationship with Sarah by acknowledging your shared history? What if he's made a calculated decision to pretend the past didn't happen? The idea was almost worse than thinking he'd forgotten me. At least forgetting could be blamed on time or age or the natural fading of memory, but deliberately erasing me from his history? That was a choice, a conscious decision to treat our relationship as something shameful that needed to be hidden. "What should I do?" I asked. "What do you want to do?" I wanted to shake Sarah until she listened to me. I wanted to confront David and demand that he tell the truth. I wanted to march into their perfect relationship and expose the lie it was built on. But I also wanted my daughter to be happy. I wanted to believe that David had changed, that he was capable of the kind of love he'd never given me. I wanted to trust that Sarah's judgment was better than mine, that she could see something in David that I'd missed. "I want to protect my daughter," I said finally. "Even if protecting her means accepting that she doesn't trust you?" The question hit home. Sarah didn't trust me. She trusted David, a man she'd known for months, more than she trusted her own mother. She was willing to dismiss my concerns, question my memories, and suggest I needed professional help rather than consider that I might be telling the truth. When had that happened? When had I become so unreliable in her eyes that my word meant nothing against a stranger's denial? 2 weeks passed without contact from Sarah. No Thursday phone call, no text messages, no acknowledgement that our confrontation on the sidewalk had happened. The silence felt intentional this time, punitive rather than merely neglectful. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for some sign that she'd thought about our conversation and realized I deserved better than dismissal. But the phone stayed quiet, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. Finally, I broke down and called her. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Sarah, it's Mom. I know you're angry with me about what happened with David, but we need to talk. I love you and I'm worried about you. Please call me back." She didn't. I left another message 3 days later, then another a week after that. Each message got shorter, more tentative, more desperate. I found myself apologizing for things I wasn't sure I'd done wrong, begging for forgiveness for crimes I couldn't name. "Sarah, I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. I'm sorry if I seemed crazy or jealous or confused. I just need to hear your voice. Please call me back." But she didn't call back. And with each day of silence, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and less significant. If my own daughter could dismiss me so completely, what did that say about my worth as a person? What did that say about the love I thought we shared? I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed replaying every conversation Sarah and I had shared over the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed, clues that our relationship was more fragile than I'd realized. I analyzed my own behavior obsessively. Had I been too needy, too clingy, too unwilling to accept that Sarah had grown beyond me? Maybe she was right to cut contact. Maybe I was becoming the kind of mother who couldn't let her adult children live their own lives. Maybe my concerns about David were really just expressions of my own loneliness, my inability to accept that Sarah didn't need me anymore. But late at night, in the quiet of my apartment, I kept coming back to the same truth. I knew David Martinez. I had loved him and been abandoned by him. And now he was lying to my daughter about who he was, building their relationship on a foundation of deception. Whether Sarah believed me or not, whether she ever spoke to me again or not, I couldn't pretend that wasn't true. I couldn't unsee the recognition in David's eyes during that split second, before he composed himself and pretended I was a stranger. A month into our estrangement, I ran into Mrs. Chen from 4B in the laundry room. She's a tiny woman in her 70s who immigrates from China 40 years ago and speaks English with careful precision. We've been neighbors for 6 years, but our conversations have always been limited to pleasantries about the weather and complaints about the building's heating. That day, though, she looked at me with unusual concern. "You okay, Margaret? You look very sad lately." Her directness caught me off guard. I'm not used to people asking about my emotional state, especially neighbors I barely know. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just tired." Mrs. Chen studied my face with the kind of penetrating stare that only old women can get away with. "You not fine? You crying? I hear you at night sometimes through the walls." The fact that my grief was audible to my neighbors mortified me. I thought I'd been suffering quietly, privately. But apparently my pain was loud enough to disturb Mrs. Chen's sleep. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't realize—" "No, sorry. Crying is normal. I cry too sometimes. When I miss my daughter in California, when I worry about my grandson, we are old women. We have reasons to cry." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of sadness was unexpectedly comforting. She didn't tell me to cheer up or look on the bright side. She just acknowledged that pain was part of life, especially for women our age who'd lived long enough to accumulate real losses. "You want to talk?" she asked. "I make tea. Good Chinese tea, not the garbage from supermarket." I found myself nodding, grateful for any human contact that didn't require me to pretend I was okay. Mrs. Chen's apartment was a mirror image of mine, but felt completely different. Where my walls were bare except for a few photos of Sarah, hers were covered with family pictures, Chinese calligraphy, and bright red decorations that made the space feel warm and alive. She made tea in a proper ceramic pot, performing the ritual with reverence and grace. The tea was delicate and fragrant, nothing like the harsh bags I used at home. "Now," she said, settling into her armchair across from me, "you tell me what makes you so sad." I found myself telling her everything. About Sarah's distance, about David's reappearance, about the confrontation on the sidewalk and the silence that followed. Mrs. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea and considering my words. "Your daughter," she said finally. "She is ashamed of you?" The bluntness of the question startled me. "I don't think... she's just busy with her life." "Margaret." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "I have daughter too. She live in California. Very successful. Very busy. But she call me every week. She visit twice a year. She respect me, even when we disagree. This is how children should treat parents who love them." Her words hit me like cold water. I'd been making excuses for Sarah's behavior for so long that I'd forgotten what reasonable filial behavior looked like. "Your daughter, she take your love for granted. She think you always be there no matter how she treat you. Maybe she need to learn that your love is precious thing. not to be wasted. But she's all I have, I whispered. If I lose her? If she only love you when you do exactly what she want, then you already lost her. Real love, it survives disagreement. Real love, it make room for truth, even uncomfortable truth. Mrs. Chen was right, but the truth was terrifying. If I stopped enabling Sarah's neglect, if I demanded the respect I deserved, she might choose to cut me out of her life entirely. At least now I had some connection with her, however strained and painful. If I pushed for more, I might end up with nothing. But nothing was starting to feel preferable to this constant state of anxiety and rejection. Nothing was cleaner than false hope. What should I do? I asked. Mrs. Chen smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. You live for yourself, little bit. You remember that you are person with value, not just mother who serve ungrateful child. You find out what makes Margaret happy, separate from Sarah. It had been so long since I'd thought of myself as separate from my role as Sarah's mother that I wasn't sure I remembered who Margaret was on her own. For 32 years, my identity had been entirely defined by my daughter's needs, her happiness, her success. I was Margaret Sarah's mother, not just Margaret. But maybe it was time to remember. I started small. The next week, instead of waiting by the phone for Sarah's call that never came, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I hadn't painted since high school, but the instructor, a patient woman named Elena, assured the class that it was never too late to start creating. My first attempts were laughably bad. Muddy colors that ran together, flowers that looked more like abstract splashes than recognizable forms. But there was something soothing about the focus painting required, the way it demanded my complete attention and left no room for worry or hurt. The other students were mostly women my age or older, dealing with their own versions of loss and reinvention. Grace was learning to paint after her husband died. Linda was exploring art after retiring from 30 years of teaching. Maria was rediscovering creativity after her children moved away and stopped needing her constant attention. We didn't talk much during class. We were too focused on our work. But there was a companionable silence, a shared understanding that we were all trying to build something beautiful out of the broken pieces of our later lives. After the fourth class, Elena approached me as I was cleaning my brushes. Margaret, you have a natural eye for color. Have you considered taking the intermediate class? I almost laughed. Me, with a natural eye for anything? I was so used to thinking of myself as incompetent, as someone who did everything wrong, that the idea of having talent in anything seemed impossible. I don't know, I said. I'm just a beginner. So was Grandma Moses when she started painting at 78, Elena said. Age doesn't disqualify you from growth. That night, I looked up Grandma Moses online. Anna Mary Robertson Moses, who didn't start painting until her late 70s and went on to have her work displayed in museums around the world. She'd been a nobody, a farmer's wife from upstate New York, until she decided that her age was no barrier to creating something meaningful. If she could reinvent herself at 78, maybe I could figure out who I was at 67. I signed up for the intermediate class and bought real art supplies. Not cheap watercolors from the drugstore, but quality paints and brushes and paper. For the first time in months, I spent money on something purely for my own enjoyment, without guilt or justification. The act of creation became a meditation, a way of processing emotions that were too complex for words. I painted the view from my kitchen window, the courtyard with its fire escapes and scattered pigeons. I painted memories of Sarah as a child, not photographic reproductions, but impressions of feeling, the warmth of a small hand in mine, the weight of a sleeping child on my lap. I painted David too, though I didn't tell anyone what those portraits represented. I painted him as I remembered him, laughing in my kitchen, reading the newspaper on my couch, standing at my sink washing dishes while humming off-key. I painted the love I'd felt for him and the devastation of his abandonment. The paintings weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. They were proof that I could create something beautiful, something meaningful, something that existed independently of my relationship with Sarah or anyone else. As winter moved toward spring, I found myself looking forward to Tuesday evenings at the community center more than I'd looked forward to anything in years. I was making friends, tentative, careful friendships with women who understood loss and resilience, and the particular challenges of aging in a culture that values youth above wisdom. Grace invited me to lunch after class one week. We went to a small Polish restaurant in Greenpoint, where the pierogi were handmade and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. We talked about our children. Hers were distant but polite, more like strangers than family, and our struggles with loneliness and irrelevance. I keep waiting for my life to feel important again, Grace said over her second cup of coffee. After Harold died, after the kids moved away, I feel like I'm just taking up space. I knew exactly what she meant. Since Sarah had pulled away, I'd felt like I was living in the margins of my own existence, waiting for permission to matter again. But maybe, I said slowly, thinking out loud, maybe our lives are important because we're living them. Maybe we don't need anyone else's permission to take up space. Grace smiled. You sound like my therapist. She's always telling me that self-worth can't depend on other people's validation. Is it working? The therapy? Slowly. Some days I believe her. Other days I just feel like a burden on the world. I understood that feeling intimately. But something had shifted in me during these months of painting and friendship and gradual self-discovery. I was starting to remember that I'd had value before Sarah was born, that I'd been a complete person with interests and dreams and capabilities that extended beyond motherhood. It was May when Sarah finally called. I was cleaning my paintbrushes after a particularly satisfying afternoon working on a landscape, the view of the Manhattan skyline from Gantry Plaza State Park, when my phone rang. My heart stopped when I saw her name on the screen. After 3 months of silence, hearing from Sarah felt like a resurrection, a chance to rebuild what we'd lost. Hi, Mom. Her voice was careful, neutral, not warm, but not actively hostile either. Sarah. I tried to keep my voice level, though I wanted to cry with relief. How are you? I'm okay. Listen, I want to talk to you about something. David and I are getting married. The words hit me like a physical blow. Married. My daughter was marrying the man who'd broken my heart, who'd lied about knowing me, who'd built their relationship on a foundation of deception. Sarah, before you say anything, I want you to know that we've talked about what happened. David understands that you thought you knew him, and he feels bad that you were confused. But he's never lived in Queens, Mom. He's never been to a support group. I think you met someone who looked like him, or maybe had a similar name. The patronizing tone in her voice was worse than anger would have been. She was speaking to me the way you'd speak to a small child who'd gotten confused about something obvious. I wasn't confused, Sarah. Mom, please, we've been over this. David showed me his driver's license. He's lived at the same address in Manhattan for 15 years. He's never been married, never lived in Queens, never been to therapy or support groups. Whatever relationship you think you had, it wasn't with him. But I knew better. Driver's licenses could be changed, addresses could be lies. What couldn't be faked was the way David's hand had moved toward his chest when I mentioned his wedding ring, the momentary recognition in his eyes before he composed himself. The wedding is in August, Sarah continued. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. I'd like you to be there, but only if you can accept David for who he is and stop trying to make him into someone from your past. She was asking me to pretend. To smile and celebrate while she married a man who'd treated me like I was worthless, who'd erased our relationship so completely that he could look me in the eye and claim we'd never met. Sarah, I can't. You can't what? Be happy for me? Support my choice? Act like a normal mother for once? The harsh cruelty in her voice was new. In all our recent difficulties, Sarah had never been actively mean to me. Dismissive, yes. Neglectful, absolutely. But not cruel. I want to be happy for you, I said carefully. But I need you to consider the possibility that I'm telling the truth. I have considered it, Mom. I've spent months thinking about nothing else. David and I have talked about it endlessly. And the conclusion we've reached is that you're having some kind of episode. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's some kind of early dementia, but you're not thinking clearly. Dementia. She thought I had dementia. My own daughter thought I was losing my mind rather than accept that her fiancé might be lying to her. I'm not having an episode, Sarah. I'm 67, not 97. My mind is fine. Then why are you so obsessed with David? Why are you trying to sabotage my happiness? I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From love? From the first man who's ever made me truly happy? The irony was devastating. David had made me happy too, for 8 months that felt like a lifetime. He'd made me believe in love again, in the possibility of companionship and partnership and shared dreams. And then he'd vanished, leaving me to wonder what fatal flaw had driven him away. Now he was giving Sarah everything he'd promised me. The commitment, the presence, the willingness to build a life together. What made her worthy of his constancy when I'd been worthy only of abandonment? Sarah, I said quietly, what if I could prove that David and I knew each other? You can't, because it's not true. But what if I could? What if I had evidence? A long pause. What kind of evidence? I thought about the box in my bedroom closet, filled with mementos from my relationship with David, the movie ticket stubs, the pressed flower, the handwritten note. But would any of that convince Sarah? Would she accept that her fiancé had been in my bed, in my life, in my heart? Pictures, I said. I have pictures of David and me together. Another pause. Show me. My heart raced. This was it, my chance to prove that I wasn't delusional, that my memories were real, that David was lying to both of us. Come over for dinner Sunday, I said. I'll show you everything. Fine. But Mom, if these pictures don't show what you think they show, you need to get help. Real help. And you need to stop interfering in my relationship. And if they do show what I think they show? Silence on the other end of the line. They won't, Sarah said finally. But if somehow, impossibly, you're right about this, then David and I will figure out how to deal with it. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, my hands shaking with adrenaline and terror. In 3 days, I would either prove my sanity and expose David's deception, or I would confirm my daughter's belief that I was losing my grip on reality. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the box I hadn't opened in 3 years. The photographs were on top, carefully preserved in a small album. David and me at the Bronx Zoo, feeding the sea lions. David and me at a street fair in Corona, sharing funnel cake. David and me in my living room, his arm around my shoulders while we watched a movie. In every picture, David looked exactly like the man Sarah was planning to marry. Older now, more gray in his hair, but unmistakably the same person. There could be no question of mistaken identity, no possibility that I'd confused him with someone else. But as I looked through the photographs, a terrible thought crept into my mind. What if David had been lying to me too? What if the David I'd known, retired postal worker from Flushing, widower grieving his beloved Maria, had been as fictional as the David Sarah knew now? What if David Martinez was someone who reinvented himself for every woman he dated, creating whatever persona he thought would appeal most to their vulnerabilities? I'd been lonely, eager for companionship, ready to believe in love again. Sarah was younger, successful, probably looking for stability and maturity in a partner. Maybe neither of us knew the real David. Maybe the real David was simply a man who used women's loneliness against them, who crafted relationships designed to meet his needs while leaving his partners with nothing but confusion and pain. The thought made me sick, but it also made me more determined to show Sarah the truth. If David was a predator who targeted vulnerable women, she needed to know. If he was capable of the kind of deception I suspected, she deserved better. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of spring day that feels more like winter refusing to let go than summer beginning to arrive. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment obsessively, as if having perfect baseboards and organized closets could somehow make my revelations more credible. I made Sarah's favorite meal, chicken parmesan with linguine and garlic bread. The same dinner I'd made for her birthday every year from age 7 to 17, before she decided she was too sophisticated for her mother's simple cooking. She arrived at 6, punctual as always. She looked beautiful and successful, and utterly foreign to me in her designer clothes and careful makeup. When had my daughter become such a stranger? Hi, Mom. She hugged me briefly, the kind of hug you give to acquaintances at church, polite but distant. You look beautiful, sweetheart. How's work? Fine, busy. She glanced around the apartment with the slightly patronizing look she'd developed over the years, as if she was checking to make sure I was maintaining myself adequately. Are you eating enough? You look thin. I'm fine. Are you hungry? I made chicken parm. Something flickered in her face. Surprise, maybe even pleasure. You haven't made that in years. I thought you might like it. Over dinner, we made awkward small talk about her job, my painting class, the weather. Neither of us mentioned David or the wedding or the reason she was really there. We were both putting off the moment of truth, savoring these few minutes of normalcy before everything changed. Finally, over coffee and the strawberry cake I'd bought from her favorite bakery, Sarah brought it up. So, these pictures. I nodded and went to get the album from my bedroom. When I returned, Sarah was sitting stiffly in her chair, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. I placed the album on the table between us and opened to the first page. Sarah stared at the photograph for a long moment, her face cycling through confusion, denial, and something that might have been recognition. That's David, she said quietly. Yes. She turned the page, then another. With each picture, her expression grew more troubled, more uncertain. When were these taken? She asked. About 5 years ago. We dated for 8 months. Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying the photographs with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. Finally, she looked up at me. I don't understand. If you really knew David, why would he lie about it? Why would he pretend he'd never met you? I don't know, Sarah. I've been trying to figure that out for months. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he thought it would be weird, dating his ex-girlfriend's daughter. I wanted to point out that David hadn't known I was her mother when they met, that the weirdness was entirely of his own creation. But Sarah was struggling to process this revelation, and I didn't want to push too hard too fast. Maybe, I said. But why lie about everything else? About where he lived, about being married, about going to grief counseling? Sarah shook her head slowly. I need to talk to him about this. Will you tell me what he says? I don't know, Mom. This is all really confusing right now. She left shortly after that, taking the album with her after asking if she could show the pictures to David. I agreed, though I suspected David would find some way to explain them away or dismiss their significance. 2 days later, Sarah called. I talked to David, she said without preamble. And? He says he remembers you now. He says he'd forgotten about the relationship because it wasn't very serious. And when he saw you that day on the street, he panicked. He was worried I'd be upset about him dating my mother. It wasn't very serious. 8 months of my life, 8 months of shared dinners and quiet conversations and growing love, dismissed as insignificant. A relationship so meaningless that it could slip entirely from his memory until confronted with photographic evidence. So he admits he lied to you, I said. He admits he wasn't completely honest. But he explained everything, and I understand why he did it. He was trying to protect our relationship. By lying about his entire past? By not complicating things unnecessarily. Mom, what you and David had was years ago. It's not relevant to his relationship with me. But it was relevant, in ways Sarah couldn't see yet. It was relevant because it showed David's capacity for deception, his willingness to rewrite history to suit his needs. It was relevant because it raised questions about who David really was, beneath all the carefully constructed personas he presented to the women in his life. Sarah, don't you think it's strange that he forgot about our relationship entirely? Don't you wonder what else he might be lying about? I think you're looking for problems that don't exist. David and I talked about everything, really talked. He told me about his first marriage, about why it ended, about the challenges of dating at his age. He was honest with me about his past, Mom. He just didn't think his relationship with you was worth mentioning. His first marriage. So now David was admitting to being married, but apparently it was a different marriage than the one he'd told me about. Maria, his beloved wife who died of cancer, had been replaced by some other woman whose story better fit his new narrative. I felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole, where nothing was stable and every truth turned into a lie the moment I tried to hold on to it. What did he tell you about his first wife? I asked. That's between David and me, Mom. I'm not going to share the details of his personal history with you. Of course not. Sarah would protect David's privacy while dismissing my own experience as irrelevant. She would guard his secrets while treating my memories as unreliable. Sarah, I'm worried about you. I'm worried that David isn't who he says he is. And I'm worried about you, Mom. I'm worried that you can't accept that I've found someone who makes me happy. I'm worried that you're so lonely and jealous that you're trying to sabotage my relationship. There it was again. Jealousy. As if my concerns were nothing more than petty envy of Sarah's youth and happiness. As if I couldn't genuinely want to protect her without ulterior motives. I'm not jealous, Sarah. I'm scared. I'm scared because I love David too, and he abandoned me without explanation. I'm scared because he's lying to you about basic facts of his life. I'm scared because you're planning to marry someone you don't really know. I know David better than you ever did. We've been together for over a year, and we've talked about everything. We're compatible in ways you and he never were. Compatible in ways you and he never were. The words stung because they implied that my relationship with David had been inadequate, that whatever connection we'd shared had been inferior to what he found with Sarah. Maybe she was right. Maybe David and I had never been truly compatible. Maybe our 8 months together had been an illusion, a temporary convenience for both of us rather than real love. Maybe that's why it had been so easy for him to walk away. But if that was true, why had I been so devastated by his leaving? Why had I spent 3 years mourning a relationship that meant nothing to him? Why did seeing him with Sarah still feel like a betrayal of everything I'd thought we'd shared? I just want you to be careful, sweetheart, I said quietly. I am being careful. I'm being careful to build my life with someone who loves me, someone who's committed to our future together. I wish you could be happy for me instead of trying to find problems where none exist. After she hung up, I sat in my living room feeling like I'd failed some crucial test. I'd presented Sarah with evidence of David's deception, and she'd chosen to believe his explanation rather than trust her own mother's concerns. She'd decided that my love for her was less reliable than his love for her, that my word was worth less than his. Maybe I was wrong to keep fighting this. Maybe I should accept that Sarah was an adult capable of making her own choices, even if those choices seemed dangerous to me. Maybe I should focus on rebuilding our relationship instead of trying to destroy hers. But late that night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that David was still lying. About his marriage, about his past, about his reasons for concealing our relationship. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was walking into the same trap I'd fallen into 5 years ago, believing in a version of David that didn't exist. The problem was that I had no way to prove my suspicions. David's explanations were plausible enough to satisfy Sarah, and my continued concerns would only reinforce her belief that I was jealous, confused, or mentally unstable. I'd spent my whole life trying to protect Sarah, first from her father's abandonment, then from poverty, then from the various disappointments and heartbreaks that come with growing up. But I couldn't protect her from this, couldn't save her from making what I believed was a terrible mistake. For the first time in 32 years, I had to accept that being Sarah's mother didn't give me the power to keep her safe. The wedding was 3 months away, and Sarah made it clear that my attendance was contingent on my behavior. I could come if I promised to be supportive, to welcome David into the family without reservation, to act like a normal mother instead of a paranoid obstacle to their happiness. I wanted to go. Despite everything, I wanted to witness my daughter's wedding, to be part of the most important day of her life. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong about David, that maybe he really had changed, that maybe Sarah's happiness was worth more than my concerns. But I also knew that watching David walk down the aisle toward my daughter would be one of the most painful experiences of my life. Not because I still loved him, I wasn't sure I ever had, really, but because it would represent the final victory of his version of reality over mine. If I went to the wedding, I would be implicitly accepting that our relationship had meant nothing, that my memories were unreliable, that my concerns were unfounded. I would be celebrating the marriage of two people who'd built their relationship on lies about their past. If I didn't go, I would be confirming Sarah's belief that I was selfish, jealous, and incapable of putting her happiness above my own grievances. Either way, I would lose something precious, either my integrity or my relationship with my daughter. I spent weeks agonizing over the decision, weighing my need for truth against my love for Sarah. The women in my painting class offered conflicting advice. Grace thought I should go and try to repair my relationship with Sarah. Maria thought I should stay away and protect my own mental health. Elena suggested I let Sarah know I loved her while maintaining my boundaries about David. In the end, it was Mrs. Chen who helped me find clarity. We were having tea in her apartment one evening, and I was rambling through my confusion and anxiety for the 10th time. "Margaret," she said gently, interrupting my litany of concerns. "What would strong woman do?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been thinking of myself as a victim of circumstances, as someone caught between impossible choices. I hadn't considered what strength might look like in this situation. "I don't know," I said. "What would a strong woman do?" Strong woman, she know her own truth. She not let other people tell her what she experienced, what she remember, what she worth. She protect herself, but she also leave door open for love, if love come with respect. Mrs. Chen was right. I'd been so focused on trying to convince Sarah of the truth that I'd forgotten to honor the truth myself. I'd been so desperate to maintain our relationship that I'd allowed myself to be diminished, dismissed, and disbelieved. A strong woman wouldn't beg for scraps of attention from a daughter who treated her concerns with contempt. A strong woman wouldn't attend a wedding that celebrated her own erasure from history. But a strong woman also wouldn't close her heart entirely. She would leave room for reconciliation, for growth, for the possibility that relationships could change and deepen over time. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called Sarah. "I won't be attending your wedding," I said without preamble. Silence on the other end, then, "Because of David. Because I can't celebrate a relationship built on lies. Because I can't pretend that my own experiences don't matter. Because I deserve better than to be dismissed and disbelieved by my own daughter." "Mom, I love you, Sarah. I will always love you. And when you're ready to have a real conversation about David, about our family, about the way we treat each other, I'll be here. But I won't be a prop in a wedding that denies my existence." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking, but my heart surprisingly calm. For the first time in months, I had acted with integrity instead of desperation. I had chosen truth over convenience, self-respect over the illusion of harmony. Sarah didn't call back that day, or the next, or the next. As her wedding approached, I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for some sign that she'd reconsidered, that she wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could work through our issues. But my phone stayed silent. The day of Sarah's wedding, I went to my painting class instead. We were working on portraits, trying to capture not just physical features, but emotional truth. I painted myself as I was that day, older, sadder, but somehow more solid than I'd been in years. Elena commented on the strength in my brush strokes, the confidence in my color choices. "You're painting like someone who knows exactly who she is," she said. And maybe I was beginning to. Not Margaret, Sarah's mother, not Margaret, the abandoned girlfriend, but just Margaret. A woman who'd made mistakes and survived losses, and was learning, at 67, to value her own truth above other people's comfort. That evening, I received a single text from Sarah. "The wedding was beautiful. I wish you had been there." I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Apologies, explanations, expressions of love and regret. In the end, I sent back, "I love you. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'm here." 3 months passed without contact. I threw myself into my painting with new intensity, exploring techniques and subjects that challenged me. I took a pottery class, joined a book club, volunteered at a local food bank. I built a life that existed independently of Sarah's approval, independently of anyone's need for me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. The loneliness was real and sometimes crushing. There were nights when I sat in my apartment wondering if I'd made the right choice, if preserving my dignity was worth losing my daughter. But there were also mornings when I woke up proud of the woman I was becoming, grateful for the integrity I'd chosen to maintain. In December, almost 4 months after the wedding, Sarah called. "Mom, it's me." Her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd heard it in years. "Hi, sweetheart, how are you?" I need to talk to you. About David. About everything." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay. Can I come over? Tonight? Of course. She arrived 2 hours later, looking exhausted and somehow younger than her 32 years. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the fragility in her posture, the way she held herself like someone who'd been hurt and was trying not to show it. I found something, she said without preamble, pulling an envelope from her purse, hidden in David's desk drawer. Inside the envelope were photographs, pictures of David with other women. Not Sarah, not me, but strangers I didn't recognize. In each photo, David looked happy, comfortable, invested. In each photo, he looked like a man in love. There are more, Sarah said quietly. Letters, emails, gifts from women I've never heard of. Women he was with while he was dating me. Women he was with while he was dating you. The evidence was devastating and somehow unsurprising. David wasn't just a man who reinvented himself for different women. He was a man who maintained multiple relationships simultaneously, creating elaborate lies to keep his various lives separate. Sarah, I'm so sorry. She laughed bitterly. You tried to warn me. You tried to tell me he was lying, and I called you jealous. I called you delusional. You were protecting your heart. I understand that. I was protecting his lies. I was choosing his version of reality over yours, and you're my mother. You're the person who's loved me longest and most consistently, and I dismissed you like you were nothing. We talked until dawn, comparing stories, fitting together pieces of David's deceptions. Sarah had found evidence of at least 3 other relationships during their time together, including one with a woman named Elena, who thought she was David's only love. I called Elena, Sarah said. She's been with David for 2 years. He told her he was divorced, that his ex-wife was bitter and trying to interfere with his happiness. She had no idea about me, about you, about any of us. The scope of David's betrayal was staggering. Not just emotional infidelity, but an entire system of manipulation designed to extract love, attention, and resources from multiple women while giving nothing real in return. What are you going to do? I asked. I left him yesterday. Packed my things while he was at work and moved back to my old apartment. I'm filing for divorce next week. How are you feeling? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out my kitchen window at the courtyard where pigeons were beginning to stir. Stupid, angry, betrayed, but also relieved. Like I've been trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense, and now I finally have all the pieces. And us? How are we? She turned to look at me, and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time since she was a teenager. I owe you such an apology, Mom. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you respect and trust and the benefit of the doubt. I owe you the assumption that when you're concerned about me, it's because you love me, not because you're jealous or confused or losing your mind. We both made mistakes, sweetheart. We both— No. Her voice was firm. This isn't on both of us. I treated you terribly. I dismissed your concerns, questioned your memories, suggested you needed professional help. I chose a man I'd known for a year over the mother who raised me alone and sacrificed everything for my happiness. The acknowledgement of my sacrifices felt like a gift I hadn't realized I needed. For so long, Sarah had seemed to take my devotion for granted, as if my love and support were simply part of the natural order rather than choices I made every day. I did it because I was terrified, she continued. Terrified that if David wasn't who I thought he was, then I was a fool. Terrified that if I couldn't trust my judgment about him, I couldn't trust my judgment about anything. It felt safer to believe you were wrong than to face the possibility that I'd been completely deceived. I understood that fear intimately. I'd felt it myself when David disappeared, when I'd wondered if I'd imagined the entire relationship, if I'd been so desperate for love that I'd constructed a fantasy where none existed. We're both survivors now, I said. We both know what it feels like to be lied to by someone we trusted. Over the following weeks, Sarah and I began the slow work of rebuilding our relationship. She called every few days, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to connect. She asked about my painting, my classes, my life outside of my role as her mother. She also began therapy, working with Dr. Rodriguez to understand how she'd become vulnerable to David's manipulation and how she could build healthier relationships in the future. She says I have abandonment issues, Sarah told me one evening over dinner at my apartment. From Dad leaving, from feeling like I had to be perfect to keep you from leaving too. The revelation broke my heart. I'd tried so hard to shield Sarah from the effects of her father's abandonment, but apparently I'd failed. She'd grown up believing that love was conditional, that she had to earn and re-earn affection through achievement and good behavior. I never wanted to leave you, I said quietly. Even when you pushed me away, even when you hurt me, I never wanted to leave. But I didn't know that. I thought if I showed you how successful I was, how independent, how little I needed you, then you'd be proud of me. I didn't realize I was actually pushing you away. We talked about those years of growing distance, the phone calls that became shorter and less frequent, the way Sarah had built walls around her life to keep me at a safe distance. She'd thought she was protecting both of us, protecting herself from potential abandonment and protecting me from her neediness. But in trying to shield us both from vulnerability, she'd created the very distance she feared. I want to do better, Sarah said. I want to learn how to love you without pushing you away. I want to learn how to need people in healthy ways. I want to do better too, I admitted. I want to learn how to support you without trying to control you. I want to learn how to trust your judgment while still offering my perspective when I'm concerned. It wasn't easy work. We were both carrying decades of hurt and misunderstanding, both struggling to unlearn patterns that had felt necessary for survival. Sarah had to learn to trust that I wouldn't abandon her even when she was vulnerable. I had to learn to trust that she wouldn't reject me even when I had needs. But slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. Not the mother-daughter relationship of Sarah's childhood, when I was the powerful protector, and she was the vulnerable child, but an adult relationship between two women who loved each other and were committed to figuring out how to do it better. Sarah helped me set up an online gallery for my paintings, creating a website that showcased my work with professional photography and thoughtful descriptions. To my amazement, people began buying my art, not masterpieces, but honest expressions of emotion that resonated with other people navigating loss and change. I helped Sarah process her divorce, offering practical support and emotional comfort without trying to make decisions for her. When she worried that she'd never trust her judgment again, I reminded her that being deceived by a skilled manipulator wasn't evidence of poor judgment. It was evidence that she'd been unlucky enough to encounter someone who made a career of deception. Look at how many women he fooled, I pointed out. Elena, me, you, probably dozens of others. That's not about our weakness. That's about his skill at lying. 6 months after Sarah left David, she met someone new. Andrew was a high school teacher, divorced with 2 young children, honest about his past and present in ways that felt foreign after David's constant deceptions. Sarah brought him to dinner at my apartment, nervous about my reaction, worried that I'd be suspicious of any man who showed interest in her. But Andrew was clearly the real thing, kind, straightforward, interested in Sarah's thoughts and feelings, rather than just her appearance or success. He asked me about my paintings, listened to my stories about Sarah's childhood, treated me like a person rather than an obstacle to overcome. He's different, Sarah told me later. When I tell him about David, about what happened, he doesn't get defensive or try to prove he's not like that. He just listens and asks how he can help me feel safe. Watching Sarah learn to trust again, to open her heart despite her recent betrayal, was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. She was careful, but not closed, thoughtful, but not paralyzed by fear. She was becoming the woman I'd always known she could be, strong enough to love despite the risk of being hurt. A year after Sarah left David, we went to therapy together for the first time. Dr. Rodriguez had suggested family sessions to help us address some of the deeper patterns in our relationship, and we were both ready to do that work. What do you most want Sarah to understand about you? Dr. Nides. Rodriguez asked me during our first joint session. That I'm not just her mother, I said. I'm a complete person with my own thoughts and feelings and experiences. When she dismisses my concerns or treats my opinions as less valid than other people's, it's not just hurtful. It's dehumanizing. Sarah cried as I spoke, not the angry tears of our past conflicts, but tears of recognition and regret. What do you most want your mother to understand about you? Dr. Rodriguez asked Sarah. that I'm not ungrateful for everything she did for me, that when I try to be independent, I'm not rejecting her. I'm trying to become someone worthy of her sacrifices, that I love her more than I know how to express. We left that session emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. For the first time in years, maybe ever, we'd spoken to each other without defensiveness or manipulation or hidden agendas. We'd just been honest about our love and our hurt and our desire to do better. The work continues. Today, 2 years after Sarah's divorce, we talk several times a week. Real conversations about our jobs, our relationships, our fears and dreams, and daily frustrations. Sarah visits regularly, bringing Andrew and his children sometimes, creating the kind of extended family I never imagined I'd have. My art has evolved too. I'm painting portraits now, not just faces, but emotional landscapes that capture something essential about my subjects. Sarah commissioned a portrait of herself as a gift for Andrew, and I painted her as I see her now, strong, thoughtful, beautifully human in her imperfections. I've also painted David, though Sarah doesn't know this. Not romantic portraits like the ones I created during our relationship, but a single painting that captures what I now understand about him. A man with multiple faces, each one charming and convincing, each one ultimately hollow. It's not a painting of hatred or revenge, but of understanding. David was what he was, and I survived him. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. If I'd been less confrontational about David, if I'd trusted Sarah's judgment from the beginning, if I'd focused on rebuilding our relationship instead of trying to expose his lies. But then I remember that standing up for truth, even when it's inconvenient or painful, is what allowed Sarah and me to find our way back to each other. If I'd enabled her illusions about David, we might have maintained a surface relationship while avoiding the deeper work of understanding and forgiveness. The truth, as difficult as it was to navigate, ultimately set us both free. Mrs. Chen was right. I needed to remember my own worth, to insist on respect, to build a life that existed independently of other people's approval. And Sarah needed to learn that love doesn't require the erasure of inconvenient truths, that healthy relationships can survive disagreement and challenge. We're both different people now than we were 3 years ago. Older, yes, but also wiser, more honest, more capable of love without conditions or agendas. We've learned that family relationships don't have to follow scripts written in childhood, that it's possible to change patterns that seemed fixed and permanent. My apartment is different too. The walls that once held only a few photos of Sarah now showcase my paintings, evidence of the creative life I've built for myself. The kitchen table where I once ate birthday cake alone now regularly hosts dinners with Sarah and Andrew, with friends from my art classes, with Mrs. Chen and other neighbors who've become part of my chosen family. I'm 69 now, living in the same small apartment in Queens where this story began. But I'm not the same woman who waited desperately for phone calls that didn't come, who measured her worth by her daughter's attention, who was willing to accept crumbs of love rather than demand the respect she deserved. I'm a woman who paints her truth, who speaks her mind, who loves fiercely but without desperation. I'm a woman who learned, perhaps later than I should have, that self-respect is the foundation of all other relationships. And I'm Sarah's mother, not in the diminished way I once understood that role, but in the fullest sense of the word. I'm the woman who raised her, who protected her when she couldn't protect herself, who challenged her when she needed challenging, and who loved her enough to risk everything for the sake of truth. Yesterday, Sarah called to tell me she and Andrew are engaged. Real engagement this time, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than deception and fantasy. She asked if I would help her plan the wedding, if I would be her matron of honor, if I would give a speech about love and commitment and the importance of choosing partners who see and value your authentic self. Of course, I said yes. Because that's what mothers do. We celebrate our children's joy, we support their growth, we offer our wisdom and our love without reservation when it's welcomed and received with respect. But we also protect our own hearts and minds. We insist on being seen as whole people rather than just supporting characters in someone else's story. We love without sacrificing our dignity, support without enabling harmful behavior, and forgive without forgetting the lessons that suffering has taught us. I learned all of this the hard way, through years of pain and confusion and the slow work of rebuilding trust. But I learned it, And that learning has made me strong in ways I never imagined possible. If you're listening to this story, if anything in it feels familiar to you, I want you to know that it's never too late to insist on better. It's never too late to value your own truth, to demand respect from the people who claim to love you, to build a life that honors your worth as a human being. You don't have to accept dismissal or manipulation or the constant questioning of your reality. You don't have to settle for relationships that diminish you in order to make other people more comfortable. You don't have to choose between love and integrity. Real love makes room for both. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for the truth? Have you ever been made to feel crazy or jealous or unreliable when you tried to express legitimate concerns? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Because sharing our experiences, the painful ones as well as the triumphant ones, is how we help each other remember that we're not alone in this journey. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that you deserve better than you've been accepting, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps these stories reach other people who need to hear that they're worth fighting for, that truth matters, and that it's never too late to choose dignity over desperation. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me, for believing me, for understanding that every heart that breaks can learn, with time and courage, to beat stronger than before.